Here's your first open E string. We're going to start in standard tuning. Here's high E. And again. The very first things that you got to think about are individual hand techniques. They're very different from left hand to right hand, or I guess slide hand and picking hand. Your basic left hand technique, in my case left hand, your thumb is going to sit in the middle of the back of the neck, okay? And it's going to be like an invisible line going up and down the neck like this. Your fingers are going to gently, very, very, very gently, just rest on the strings. The most common mistake that people make is to really dig in when you're playing slide. And that kind of defeats the purpose, because then you get the sound of all those frets. The point is just to let it glide. Very gentle, dragging behind the slide to mute unwanted things. So for example, you have all this extraneous noise if you don't mute with these fingers. You get a very nice smooth sound just like that. Okay, now your thumb is going to be really important because it's the only part of your whole arm that comes in contact with the guitar when you're actually playing slide. So this ends up being a very important pivot because, like that. Okay, as far as the slide goes, I prefer my ring finger. Some people like pinky, some people like middle finger. I find that my ring finger is a lot more dexterous than my pinky finger, so I can be a lot more sensitive with it like that. To get basic notes out of the slide, you got to be right on top of the fret, just like you would with a harmonic, because ultimately that's where the note happens. If you put your finger down on a fret, it's this point right here. You can put anywhere in between the frets, but the actual fret is where the note occurs, and that's what's stopping it. So with your slide, you got to be right above it. Okay, that's a high E. For example, if I'm in between the frets, you get that flat kind of sour note. So that's going to be important as well. Again, very gentle, directly above the fret, because if you push down, you're going to actually hit the fret. Okay, there I just am approaching 12th fret, just like that. Okay, so for basic picking hand technique, this happens to be my right hand. In general, you're going to use your thumb to rest on the strings and mute any of the strings that you're not playing. For example, if I'm playing on the first string, my thumb is going to rest on the second string, and the back of my hand right here is going to mute all those other strings, so that the only string that can possibly ring is that first string. Okay, this is going to be very, very important, especially when we start to move across the strings, because nothing's worse than listening to a slide player. The important thing is to separate each of these notes, especially at the outset. You can always get sloppier, but you want to start very, very articulate. People have asked me repeatedly why it's no good to use a pick when playing slide. And the main thing is that there's nothing wrong with using a pick, it just makes it a lot more difficult to articulate things. I find that using your fingertips, okay, it makes it very easy to surround the notes that you're actually playing with muted strings. For example, if I'm just going to play the second string, okay, my thumb is muting everything below it and my other fingers are muting the top. So again, the second string is the only thing that can ring, especially when I'm going across the strings like that. Okay, whereas if I tried the same thing with a pick, you're basically using your two most dexterous fingers to hold a little bit of plastic. It makes it very difficult to surround the notes that you're playing. Okay, here's what you end up with. And you don't want to play like that. Again. Okay, my right hand is responsible for all this articulation. So again, like I said, it's not illegal, it's not wrong morally to use a pick. I just find that it's a lot more effective if you use your fingertips to mute the unwanted things. So rather than just concentrating on the notes that you do want, making sure that you don't get extra notes that you don't want.